In front of 450 guests at the grand reopening of my husband's family's $90 million resort, my father-in-law called me a woman who only knew how to pick curtains. My husband handed the executive key to the woman sitting in the chair with my name on it. "The person who rebuilt this hotel isn't the person in the photographs," I said. Evan ripped the microphone from my hand, removed the executive badge from my neck, and called security. They escorted me through the service entrance and out into the rain behind the hotel I had spent 6 years restoring. I made exactly one phone call to a number I had not used in 9 years. "Dad, tell Maya to put the land lease extension file on hold." There was a beat of silence on the other end. "Are you calling as Evan's wife, or as the beneficiary of the trust?" I looked back at the Grand Mariner. For the first time in 9 years, I answered with my real name. Before I tell you what happened after that night, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you have ever been dismissed by the people you loved most, don't go anywhere, because what they did to me seemed to destroy everything, but they had no idea they had just given me a reason to turn the entire game around. And if you have never been through that, listen closely, because sometimes betrayal begins with small signs we recognize only when it is already too late. At 5 o'clock on the afternoon of the grand reopening, I was alone in the east basement of the Grand Mariner with a flashlight, a handheld thermal camera, a surface moisture meter, and a notebook with a worn spine. I aimed the thermal camera at the new concrete face of the seawall, waited for the device to stabilize, then recorded the temperature and moisture level at each location. Concrete poured the month before had to cure evenly. If one area was significantly colder or wetter, it could be a sign that seawater was seeping in. I walked the entire length of the wall. No reading varied by more than half a degree, and every moisture level was within the acceptance threshold. That was my job. I was Natalie Reed, 38 years old, a specialist in historic hotel restoration and operations. For 6 years, I had lived with this building more than I had lived with my husband. People tend to think restoring an old hotel is about choosing paint colors and arranging flowers. In reality, most of my time went into structural reports, arguments with the preservation board, and coordinating 11 contractors so 246 rooms could be brought online without overloading the entire system. The first day I walked into the Grand Mariner, the west roof leaked all the way down to the 3rd floor. Sea salt had eaten into the exterior walls. The ballroom was locked because the wood floor had buckled, and a crack ran through the seawall from the steps all the way to the water's edge. $90 million, and 6 years later, I stood in that basement, and the wall was silent. I turned off the flashlight, went up the service stairs, and allowed myself exactly 1 minute to feel proud. My husband, Evan Reed, was president of Reed Coastal Hospitality, and he was good at the things I was not. He could walk into a meeting with an investment fund and leave with a capital commitment. He knew how to talk to the press, so they printed exactly the sentence he wanted. What he did not have was patience for details. During our 9 years of marriage, whenever someone asked what I did at the Grand Mariner, Evan always answered for me with the same phrase: "Natalie handles the decorating." I used to think that was simply his way of keeping the explanation short. A few minutes later, I went up to the 2nd floor executive office to finalize the access list for the evening. I locked the temporary badges and confirmed access permissions for the executive suite, the wine cellar, and the backstage corridors. Sienna Blake was standing in front of the monitor. She had been the Grand Mariner's director of guest experience for 4 months, after spending nearly a year consulting on guest experience and interior procurement for the project. She worked hard and knew how to make people feel comfortable. I had approved 2 of her proposals. A yellow badge hung around Sienna's neck. In the system I had designed myself, there were only 7 yellow badges. They opened the executive offices, the event control room, and the backstage corridors reserved for senior leadership. They did not open the mechanical rooms, the security office, the secure records area, or the penthouse floor. "Who issued that badge to you?" I asked. Sienna did not evade the question. She said Human Resources had approved the request that morning, security had issued the badge afterward, and an email from Evan's office had accompanied it. I opened my inbox. No such email had been sent to me. I found Evan in the south corridor, testing a microphone with the sound crew. I showed him the screenshot on my phone. The yellow badge list was changed without going through me, I said. Evan looked at the screen for exactly 2 seconds. It's just a communications adjustment, Natalie. Sienna has to lead the press team through the building tonight. You don't want her standing around waiting for security to open doors in front of reporters, do you? The backstage executive corridors were not part of the press tour, but the sound crew was standing 10 feet away, and I did not argue with Evan in front of employees. I said I would have security review her access permissions and badge use logs after the event. That was the first time that day I chose silence. I still remember thinking I was being professional. At around 6 that evening, I went down to the ballroom to check the seating chart. I had drawn that chart myself 6 months earlier. The family table was in the center, facing the stage. For 6 years, the chair to Evan's right had always been mine. On the new chart, my name had been moved to table 14, beside the kitchen entrance, with 3 outside consulting firms. I walked over to the family table. The chair to Evan's right had a name card made of textured paper. Sienna Blake. I picked up the card. It felt heavier than I expected. Evan came in through the side door with Lucas Collins, Lauren's husband and the family's attorney. I caught half of what Lucas was saying. The land lease extension would be completed within the week. According to him, the landlord was merely an old family trust and would not make trouble. Then Lucas saw me and stopped. I held up the name card. Explain this to me. Evan exhaled through his nose, the way a person does when dealing with something that should never have happened. Sienna needs to sit near the investors. She oversees the entire guest experience side, and they're going to have a lot of questions. I've sat there for 6 years. And tonight you're sitting at table 14. Don't turn this into an awkward scene, Natalie. Not today. He said nothing more. He walked toward the stage, where Lauren was adjusting the camera positions. I remained beside the family table for a moment. Then I saw it. Draped over the back of the chair bearing Sienna's name was a smoky blue silk scarf. I had bought it in Charleston 2 years earlier. The last time I had seen it, it was in our bedroom closet. There were several ways that scarf could have traveled from my closet to the back of another woman's chair. I listed 3 of them to myself, and all 3 were absurd. I did not have enough evidence to draw a conclusion, but I no longer viewed Sienna taking my chair as a harmless seating change. I decided to watch and wait to see what Evan would choose when he had the chance to stand beside me. I put the name card back exactly where it had been, smoothed the edge of the paper, then walked to table 14. By 7 o'clock, the ballroom was filled with 450 people. Diane Reed, my mother-in-law, stood at the main entrance in an emerald dress, greeting guests as if the building were her own living room. When I passed her, she lightly touched my arm and complimented me on how modest my outfit was. Lauren Reed Collins, Evan's younger sister and the brand director, managed the media team from one corner of the room. All evening, their cameras focused on only 4 people: Charles, Evan, Diane, and Sienna. Lucas moved between the banker's table and the investor's table, shaking hands and lingering longer with the guests who were directly connected to the deal. At 8:10, Charles Reed stepped onto the stage. He was 68 and still stood as straight as a man who had never needed anyone's permission. He told the story of the family's first hotel in Beaufort, of 3 generations of Reeds in the business, then said the Reed family possessed a special gift. They could look at a pile of ruins and see an asset. The guests applauded. Charles thanked Evan for leading the project. He thanked Diane for preserving the social soul of the Grand Mariner. He thanked Lauren for taking the Reed brand nationwide. He thanked Sienna for introducing a new standard of service. My name did not appear. I sat at table 14 and told myself the speech was not over. He still had the final section. People always saved the important part for the end. Charles said he wanted to say a few words about the people who had supported them. Then he looked toward my table. And of course, Natalie, he said, my daughter-in-law has a very pleasant sense of style. There was a small burst of laughter at a table near the front. Natalie picked out a few curtains for us and saved some old bricks. The laughter spread, the cautious kind from people who were not sure whether they were allowed to laugh until they saw the person beside them doing it too. I did not look at Charles. I looked at Evan. He sat at the family table, beneath the lighting whose placement I had chosen. inside the ballroom that had once been closed because the wood floor had buckled and that I had brought back into operation. I waited for him to stand. One sentence, that was all. Evan smiled. Then he raised his glass toward his father, and Charles went on to say that his son had been very generous to give me a career, a name, and a place in his family's hotel. Charles let his words hang in the room for exactly long enough for everyone to understand them. A respected last name. A job. A place at the Grand Mariner. He listed those three things as if he were listing three gifts, all of them bestowed by his son. Diane laughed behind the rim of her champagne glass, the closed-mouth laugh of someone who had practiced in a mirror. Lauren laughed too, then looked at Sienna. Her expression made me feel as though I were watching a program unfold exactly as she had planned. Only Lucas did not laugh. He studied me slowly and carefully, the way an attorney studies a variable that has not yet been priced. I turned toward Evan. For 6 years, I had sat beside him in meetings with the preservation board. I had written speeches that helped him persuade investors. I knew exactly how long it would take him to stand and say one sentence that would make the entire room reconsider. All he had to say was, "My wife rebuilt this building." Evan raised his glass toward his father. "Natalie has always been very dedicated to the small details," he said into the microphone. This time the laughter was no longer cautious. It broke into the pleasant noise of 450 people who had just been given permission. I sat still and felt something very strange happen inside me. It was not anger, it was silence. A cold, clear silence, as if every final doubt had just been confirmed. He had not forgotten to defend me. He had chosen not to. For 9 years, I had kept a version of Evan in my mind, who would eventually stand beside me when it truly mattered. When his champagne glass went up, that version disappeared. Evan knew what I had done for the Grand Mariner, but tonight erasing my name served him better than telling the truth. The backup microphone rested on a stand near the band platform. I knew where it was because I had approved the sound plan myself. I stood. I knew the woman who seized a microphone in the middle of her husband's grand reopening would be remembered as a disruptive wife. If I spoke, I would never return to the role of the pleasant wife sitting at table 14. I decided I did not want to return to that role. Lauren was the first person I saw react. She raised a hand to her headset and turned toward the technical table. I saw her finger point down. I walked faster. I reached the microphone and pressed the button while the technician was still searching for the channel. "Thank you, Charles," I said. The entire room turned. "You're right. I am the person who repairs old things. That is my profession. So I think tonight is the right time to talk about the east seawall." No one laughed anymore. Seawall was not an inspiring word, and that was precisely why it forced people to listen. Last October, the contractor reinforcing the seawall issued a stop work notice and began preparing to remove its equipment from the site because it had not been paid. Reed Coastal had 72 hours to pay before the contractor officially walked away. I looked toward the banker's table. If that had happened, we would not be having this evening. We would have had a suspended construction site and a building that was not cleared to open. Charles set his glass on the table. I clearly heard the base touch the wood. Within that deadline, $850,000 was transferred into the contractor's account. That money did not come from Reed Coastal Hospitality. I held the microphone with both hands so it would not shake. It came from my consulting company under an emergency advance agreement recorded as a receivable from Reed Coastal. I signed the transfer order. The ballroom went quiet in a very specific way. It was not the silence of admiration. It was the silence of people who understood finance and had just realized that an important part of the Grand Mariner story had been omitted. A bank's corporate relations officer at a nearby table turned to look at Charles. An investor stood. In a calm, direct voice, she asked the question anyone in her position would have asked. "So the company was experiencing a liquidity problem in October?" Charles opened his mouth. His face went pale, but no sound came out. Diane stopped laughing. Her diamond-covered hand lowered to the table and remained there. I had imagined that finally having my work acknowledged would bring relief. The reality was different. Standing before that room, what I felt most clearly was that I had just become a problem that needed to be handled. Not a wounded wife. A risk. And in this family, risks were always handled before sunrise. Lauren was no longer looking at Sienna, she was looking at Lucas. Lucas took his phone from the inside pocket of his jacket. He opened an email, scrolled quickly, then looked toward the banker's table before looking back at me. If I knew about the seawall advance, Lucas had to consider what else I might know. Evan left the family table. He walked to the platform without hurrying, still wearing a smile for Lauren's cameras. When he came close enough, he said through clenched teeth that I had to stop immediately. I did not stop. The person who rebuilt this hotel, I said into the microphone, is not the person in the photographs. Evan ripped the microphone from my hand. He gripped my wrist to do it, and he gripped too hard. I could feel every finger. In 9 years, it was the first time my husband had used force against me. Let go of me, I said. He did not release me immediately. He held on for 2 more seconds, long enough for me to understand that letting go or not letting go was his decision. Then he removed the executive badge from the lanyard around my neck. As of this moment, Natalie no longer has access to any executive area of the Grand Mariner, he said into the microphone for all 450 people to hear. He turned to the head of security. Disable all of her access, now. The security director touched his earpiece and relayed the instruction to the control room. The badge in Evan's hand was now only a piece of plastic bearing my name. On the podium sat a small velvet box containing a brass executive key, prepared as a symbol of the Grand Mariner's reopening. Evan opened the box, took out the key, and held it towards Sienna. She stood, walked onto the platform, and accepted it with both hands in front of the cameras without a moment's hesitation. Evan called security. 2 men in dark suits whom I had personally interviewed for their jobs came to either side of me. One avoided my eyes and quietly said he was sorry. I did not resist. I knew that if I struggled, that footage would become the only image replayed after this night. I walked out on my own feet. Through the glass wall of the corridor leading to the service area, I looked back once. Sienna had sat down in the chair bearing my name. The smoky blue silk scarf still hung over the back, and now it rested beneath her shoulders. Evan followed us to the service entrance. He told security not to take me through the front because the press was standing there. The steel door closed between me and the building I had spent 6 years rebuilding. In the 2 seconds before it shut, while Evan still had his back to me as he spoke to the guard, the phone in his hand lit up, and I read the message on the screen. The villa is ready for us tonight. The Grand Mariner's employee corridor was 40 meters long, with white ceramic tile walls, a low ceiling, and better soundproofing than any other part of the building. 4 red marks from Evan's fingers were still visible on my left wrist. That silence was intentional. 3 years earlier, I had required the contractor to add another layer of mineral wool between 2 sheets of drywall because I did not want guests hearing linen carts at 5 in the morning. Now that mineral wool was doing exactly what it was meant to do. The music, the applause, the sound of 450 people continuing the party, all of it remained behind the steel door. On this side, there was only the compressor in the cold storage room. I walked to the end of the corridor and opened the old maintenance office. It had been vacant since the engineering team moved into the new space, but I had kept the room because the cabinet containing the original 1,927 drawings was still there. I turned on the faucet over the cast iron utility sink. The 4 red marks lay exactly where Evan's fingers had tightened when he tore the microphone from my hand. I let cold water run over them, counted to 60, then dried my wrist with a paper towel. I looked at those marks longer than necessary. Not because they hurt, they did not hurt much, but because for 9 years I had told myself many stories about Evan, and none of those stories could explain these marks. In the second drawer of the maintenance desk was an inactive spare badge, the one I had used throughout construction, its plastic face scratched because I had worn it even with a hard hat. I picked it up. 6 years appeared very quickly, the way finished things often do. I had slept 11 nights in the construction site office trailer to monitor overnight concrete pours. I had led the engineering team in reinforcing the west roof before a Category 1 hurricane arrived. I had argued with Charles twice to keep 19 longtime employees he wanted to cut during the shutdown. I used to think those things were capital, that they were recorded in some account and that, when the time came, I could draw on them. That night I understood they had never been recorded anywhere. and I understood something else, something I had only then allowed myself to face. Evan was not merely erasing my work, he was replacing me. Sienna's yellow badge had been issued before the ceremony. The seating chart had been changed without telling me. My scarf appeared on the back of her chair. The executive key was handed to her in front of the cameras. Each detail could be explained on its own. Put together, I no longer believed any of them was accidental. I opened my contacts. My finger stopped on a name I had not called in 9 years. Thomas Grant. At 29, I had promised myself that I would live without relying on my father's name, refuse the position he had reserved for me, and never let anyone say my career had been purchased with family money. Calling that number meant touching the one thing I had tried to keep outside this marriage: the connection between my family and the land beneath the Grand Mariner. I pressed call. Thomas answered on the second ring. "Dad," I said, "tell Maya to put the land lease extension file on hold." There was a pause. "Are you calling as Evan's wife?" he asked, "or as the beneficiary of the trust?" I looked at the old badge in my hand. Natalie Grant. Thomas was silent for one more beat. "Where are you?" "At the Grand Mariner," I said. "Evan just took my badge." Thomas did not ask why. He did not say the sentence I had feared for 9 years. "I told you so. I'll send a car. Maya is coming with it. 40 minutes. He ended the call first. My phone vibrated immediately afterward. 3 messages from Evan, sent less than a minute apart. I was not to return to the penthouse. My belongings would be moved to an address arranged by the company. Lucas was preparing documents, and I should cooperate for my own good. I read the third message twice. Lucas was preparing documents on the night of the grand reopening, while 450 guests were still in the ballroom. That meant those documents had been drafted in advance. There were 3 things in the penthouse that I needed: my passport, my personal encrypted hard drive containing the project logs I had created, and copies of the technical excerpts from the land lease that I kept in a small safe. The hard drive contained no guest data or personnel records. I tried the old spare badge at the first-floor service entrance. The light turned red. Evan had ordered my access disabled. Security had needed only a few minutes to do it. I did not go looking for a guard to argue with. Arguing in the lobby was the fastest way to end up on camera. The penthouse was still our shared residence. Evan's message was not a court order, and I was returning only to collect my property and documents. I went down to the laundry area. A service staircase built in 1927 ran from the basement to the attic. It was not connected to the electronic lock system and still used mechanical keys. The spare key issued to me during construction was still in my personal lockbox in the maintenance office. I had less than 40 minutes before Thomas's car arrived. I opened the service stairwell with the brass key and climbed directly to the attic. From there, I went down 1 floor and opened the penthouse side door with the mechanical key I had been issued when the apartment was placed in service. The apartment was brightly lit. 4 brass luggage carts stood along the living room wall. My clothes had been taken from the closet and stuffed into cardboard boxes, not folded, just pushed inside. On the first box was a printed inventory sheet signed by housekeeping and time-stamped 7:40 p.m. 7:40. Charles was still eating the main course. My belongings had been packed before he stepped onto the stage. Housekeeping had done it under a plan prepared in advance. On the armchair by the window lay an ivory silk robe. It was not mine. The initials S.B. were embroidered in gold thread at the cuff. In the bathroom, the second compartment of the mirrored cabinet had been cleared of my belongings and replaced with a set of cosmetics that still carried the store labels. The delivery slip remained in the paper bag beside them, and the recipient was listed as Sienna Blake. I did not stay there long. A stack of delivery receipts lay on Evan's desk. I flipped through them. Bedroom furniture, stone tile, pool equipment. The delivery address on all 11 receipts was the same: Beach Villa 3. The Grand Mariner had no villa by that name on its operations map. No such villa appeared in the inventory of rooms available to guests. I opened the left drawer of Evan's desk. Inside was a brass key with a leather tag engraved with the number 3. The entire southern strip of the resort lay within the leased property. The lease prohibited construction for private residential use and required the landlord's approval for every change in use. My scarf on Sienna's chair, items bearing her name in the penthouse, and a private villa built on leased land. By then, I could no longer call it a chain of coincidences. The affair and the lease violation were not two stories. They were one story, and they occupied the same piece of land. I took my passport from the small safe. I took my personal encrypted hard drive. I took the copies of the technical excerpts from the land lease. I clearly photographed all 11 delivery receipts, the time-stamped inventory sheet, the cosmetics delivery slip bearing Sienna's name, and the brass key, then returned every document and object to its exact place. Then I heard the front door unlock. There was no time to leave through the side entrance. I stepped into the dressing room, pulled the wooden door almost shut, and left a narrow gap just wide enough to see through. Evan entered with Lucas. Both were still in formal wear. Lucas was in the middle of a sentence, speaking as calmly as if he were reading a schedule, saying the signature had to be obtained before midnight, because everything would become much more expensive afterward. They went straight into the bedroom. Lucas placed a file on the bed beside the ivory silk robe embroidered with SB, smoothed the cover, and said, $30,000 to make her disappear. I pushed open the dressing room door and stepped out. Evan startled the way people do when a door that was supposed to be locked suddenly opens. He looked at me, then toward the front door, then back at me, as though trying to understand how I had gotten inside. "How did you get in here?" "I rebuilt this building," I said. "Do you think I don't know how to move through it?" Lucas did not look surprised at all. He merely adjusted his stance, turned so the table between us became a negotiating table, and opened the file. "That makes this more convenient," he said. "We can handle it tonight." Lucas made it clear that he represented Reed Coastal Hospitality and Evan, not me. I had the right to have my own attorney review the documents if I wanted, but the offer expired at midnight. He said my executive role at the Grand Mariner had ended, and the company wanted to resolve everything in a spirit of goodwill. That goodwill consisted of $30,000, 3 months of health insurance premiums paid by Reed Coastal, and the right to collect my personal belongings under security supervision. I picked up the file. $30,000. Less than a year earlier, I had transferred $850,000 into this construction project. The number they offered was not a financial number. It was a message about how much they valued me. I turned to the obligations section. In exchange, I had to waive every claim against Reed Coastal Hospitality and the Grand Mariner. I could not speak about Sienna Blake in any form. I could not contact investors, lenders, or any third party connected to the property. I could not work for a competing hotel in any coastal county where Reed Coastal operated for 5 years. And there was one more provision, buried in the middle of page 4, and written in exactly the kind of language people use when they want a clause to slip past without being read carefully. I accepted personal responsibility for unapproved renovation changes made during the project. Immediately beneath it, I was also required to confirm that my conduct at the grand reopening had damaged my marriage, Reed Coastal's reputation, and the transaction then under negotiation. I read those 2 paragraphs 3 times. In 6 years, I had never approved a single item outside the scope of the permits. I had logs. I had every set of minutes. Those sentences did not describe the truth. They created a place to put the blame, and that place had my name on it. "There's also a second document," Lucas said. He handed me a thinner packet with a blue cover and a bold title. It was a lease status certification package for the transaction, the kind of document buyers and lenders always require before a deal closes. The Reed Coastal section confirmed that the company knew of no lease violations and that every structure on the leased property had been approved. The Grant Shore Trust section, confirming the lease status and approving the change of control, remained blank. But the Reed Coastal Operations certification box already contained an image of a signature bearing my name. Beneath it was a timestamp from 4 days earlier and confirmation that the draft had been uploaded to the transaction data room. My signature. I held the packet and felt the temperature in the room change. "Who authorized the use of this signature?" Lucas did not even look down at the document. "It's a placeholder signature in a draft. It does not replace the landlord's approval." But it certifies that I know of no unapproved construction. A draft is not a final document. You uploaded a document bearing my signature to the transaction data room. I call that saving everyone time. I used my phone to photograph the signature page, the timestamp, and the confirmation that it had been uploaded to the data room. Evan stepped closer to the bed. You've been part of this project for 6 years, Natalie. You approved thousands of things. You can't take credit and then refuse responsibility. I set the packet on the table and turned it so the final page faced him. Then tell me, I said. Under what approved line item does Beach Villa 3 appear? Evan reacted faster than I expected. He did not ask how I knew. He did not pretend not to understand. His face reddened, and his hand tightened around the edge of the bed. That has nothing to do with you. It's on the leased property. It has everything to do with this. Lucas cut in, and for the first time that night, his voice lost its professional flatness. You will not speak about that structure. Not here, not to anyone. That was the clearest answer I received all evening. People do not forbid someone from talking about a maintenance shed. They forbid discussion of something they know is wrong. Lucas took a pen from his shirt pocket and placed it on the file, its tip pointing toward me. He said that if I signed, I would receive $30,000 and a clean exit. If I did not, Evan would file for divorce, and Reed Coastal would file a civil lawsuit accusing me of damaging the company, interfering with the transaction, and sabotaging its business reputation during the grand reopening. The lawsuit would become a public record. Anyone in the industry could find my name. You're 38 years old, he said. You won't have time to rebuild from the beginning. I picked up the pen. Both men in the room relaxed their shoulders. I saw it clearly, and I would remember that moment forever because it was the moment they believed I was finished. I set the pen down on the table. Then I turned the blue-covered packet to the last page and removed the copy of the page containing the signature image bearing my name. I had photographed the page, and the electronic file still remained in the data room. This is not my signature, I said. I folded the page in half and put it in my coat pocket. Evan positioned himself between me and the door. You don't understand your place. This is my family's hotel. Every brick, every foot of land. I looked at him. A sentence was ready in my mouth then, a sentence that could have ended the entire matter in that bedroom before midnight. I had been thinking about it since I discovered Beach Villa 3. But if I said it, Lucas would know exactly what needed to be concealed. The building may belong to your family, I said. I left the rest of the sentence where it was. Evan grabbed my arm just above the elbow and shoved me into the hallway hard enough that my shoulder struck the doorframe. He called security over the radio, his voice still carrying the calm of a man handling an operational incident. They took me down the employee stairs. No one spoke. The guard walking on my left still would not look at me. Outside, the rain was heavy, the straight, warm August rain of Cape Haven. Evan remained in the service doorway, dry beneath the yellow light. You will never set foot in a Reed hotel again, he said. The steel door closed. I stood beneath the loading area canopy, my hair wet, one hand holding the hard drive inside my coat pocket, and counted my breaths until they became even again. Then 2 black SUVs turned into the truck lane, their headlights sweeping across the wet wall before stopping beneath the canopy. The rear door opened. Maya Chen got out first, holding an umbrella in one hand and a hard-sided briefcase in the other. Thomas Grant stepped out behind her. My father did not hug me. He stopped one step away, looked at my hair, my wet shoulder, then down at my left wrist, where the 4 red marks had turned pale purple beneath the light. He looked for a long time. Do you want to shut down their hotel, he asked, or do you want to find out what they did to the land your grandmother left you? Thomas did not answer his own question. He removed his overcoat and draped it over my shoulders, then stepped back, keeping the careful distance of a man who was no longer sure he was allowed to touch his daughter. Maya Chen did not waste a second. She opened her briefcase beneath the canopy, took out an evidence bag and an anti-static bag. The page bearing the image of a signature in my name went into the first. The hard drive went into the second. For the 11 photographs of delivery slips on my phone, she recorded the creation times and instructed me to preserve the originals. She recorded the time, location, and name of the person transferring the items, signed, then handed the form to me to sign. From this point on, all of this has a chain of custody, she said. Otherwise, later the other side will say you created it yourself. The two SUVs left the loading lane at 11 that night. Through the rear window, I watched the Grand Mariner grow smaller, the ballroom windows still glowing, and the illuminated words on the roof set in the typeface I had chosen continuing to scroll steadily. The Grant family home stood at the end of the old harbor, 20 minutes away. I had not set foot inside in 9 years. The same rug lay in the entry. The same scent of cedar filled the house. A doctor from the family's house call service arrived shortly before midnight. He had once given me 3 stitches when I was 11. He examined my wrist and shoulder himself, documented the injuries in my medical record, then photographed them with my consent. Maya retained a copy. No broken bones. I had bruising to my wrist and a soft tissue strain in my shoulder. Barring complications, the pain would last about 1 to 2 weeks. After the doctor left, only my father and I remained in the kitchen. He poured coffee for both of us, even though it was after midnight. 9 years, he said. I want to hear it from you, not from an attorney. I had prepared this answer many times during sleepless nights at the construction site. When I said it aloud, it was shorter than I expected. I told him that if I had accepted the position he reserved for me at Grant Coastal Holdings, everything I accomplished afterward would have carried an asterisk. I said I wanted a career no one could claim had been purchased. Then I said the harder part. And I wanted to know who Evan married, me, or the name. Thomas set down his coffee cup. What result did your test produce? I looked at the semicircular burn mark on the wooden table. He loved the version of me who had nothing to lose, I said. The version who worked 14-hour days and felt grateful just to stand in the lobby. I created that version with my own hands and gave her to him. My father offered no comforting words. He nodded once, and I was grateful for that. Maya entered the kitchen at nearly 1 in the morning carrying 2 document boxes. She placed an old leather-bound volume on the table. The spine bore the year 1994. Grant Shore Trust, she said. Eleanor Grant established it in 1994, 6 months before she died. I knew the trust existed. I knew Eleanor Grant had separated a portion of the family's coastal property from the family company. What I had never read line by line was the asset schedule and the section governing voting rights. Maya unfolded the cadastral map and turned it toward me. 18 acres of waterfront land in Cape Haven, shaded light blue, stretched from the coastal road to the water's edge and wrapped around the entire southern beach. At the center of that blue area was a gray rectangle, and inside the rectangle were 4 words. Grand Mariner Resort. The Reeds own the building, Maya said. The furnishings, the brand, and the right to operate during the lease term. They do not own a single square foot of land. I sat perfectly still. Eleanor signed the original lease in 1987. When she created the trust in 1994, she transferred both the land and the landlord's rights into it. For 6 years, Reed Coastal had provided me only with technical excerpts concerning preservation, insurance, construction, and permitted use, not the full lease. The landlord's legal name and the land schedule did not appear in that operations packet. For 6 years, I had enforced those provisions without knowing the current governance structure, the remaining lease term, or my own voting rights. The original lease term was 40 years, Maya continued. Fewer than 9 months remain. There is no automatic renewal clause. Any additional term requires the trust's written approval. The lease also allows the trust to exercise temporary step-in operating rights if the tenant commits a material breach, in order to protect guests, employees, and the value of the property. It also provides that intentionally misrepresenting a structure or the status of the lease in transaction documents is a material breach that cannot be cured merely by repaying money. She opened the second file. And this is why they need that signature this week. Meridian Lux Hotels had made a $185 million offer to buy the Grand Mariner. There were 3 mandatory conditions, all beyond the Reed's control. The trust had to extend the ground lease for 30 years, confirm that no defaults existed, and approve the transfer of control of the hotel. Without those 3 approvals, Maya said, no one buys a hotel that has only 9 months left on someone else's land. Thomas slid toward me the debt schedule and balance confirmation letter Reed Coastal had submitted to the trust in its application for transaction approval. Reed Coastal Hospitality had a $38 million bridge loan with Atlantic National Bank. It matured in 5 days. The credit file also showed that Evan had personally guaranteed the loan. I looked at the number and understood the true order of that night. They had not thrown me out because Charles found me irritating. They had not replaced me with Sienna because Evan lost control for 1 minute. Packing my belongings before the speech, inserting my signature, and demanding that I sign before midnight all pointed toward the same deadline. Thomas spoke first. As the trust's administrative co-trustee, he said he could have Maya issue a litigation hold and prepare an application for emergency relief the following morning to stop the transaction. He said it in the voice of a man who had waited 9 years for the chance to do something for his daughter. No, I said. My father looked up. If we go public tomorrow morning, what happens inside the hotel? I asked. There are guests in 246 rooms. 318 employees depend on the resort's operations. An emergency order hitting an operating property will create rumors of a shutdown within hours. Guests cancel, vendors stop deliveries, and the Reeds get exactly what they need. A story about a bitter wife destroying the livelihoods of hundreds of people. I push the map into the center of the table. I don't want to win by becoming the villain in their story. I want to win with their own records. Maya reacted first, and she did not react emotionally. You want an audit. Everything the trust has the right to inspect, I said. The land records and every approval for a change in use, invoices and supporting documents for construction on the leased property. Beach Villa 3, from permits to every delivery slip, current insurance records, and every document Reed Coastal submitted to Atlantic National or Meridian concerning the lease, structures on the land, or the transfer of control. Who makes the request? Thomas asked. That was the real question, not a procedural one. Thomas still handled the trust's administrative operations, but the authority to initiate a special audit, extend the lease, or approve a change of control belonged to the managing trustee. That position was vacant. Under the trust instrument, once the sole voting beneficiary reached age 35, that beneficiary had the power to appoint or replace the managing trustee. I was the sole voting beneficiary. I was 38. I had possessed that authority for 3 years and had never used it. I appoint myself, I said, and I accept the office. Maya took out 2 documents she had already prepared, the appointment resolution and the acceptance of office. But she did not hand me a pen immediately. There is one issue I have to raise first, she said. You are preparing to divorce a man whom the evidence from this audit may directly harm. If you are simultaneously the beneficiary, the managing trustee, and an interested party in the divorce, their attorneys will attack that conflict. What do you recommend? A 3-member independent special committee to oversee the audit and decide enforcement measures. Elena conducts the work independently and signs the findings. You must recuse yourself from every decision directly related to the divorce or your personal benefit. I thought for 10 seconds. It was a fence built around me. It would slow everything down. It would also make everything far harder to overturn. Put it in the record, I said, then signed. Maya made a phone call at 1:40 in the morning. Thomas arranged a charter flight, and Elena Park landed in Charleston at 6:15 that morning. She was a forensic auditor who specialized in hospitality, and during her first 20 minutes, she did not ask a single question about Evan. She asked about the project's cost code system. The original hard drive remained sealed. Elena worked from a forensic image. The 5-day clock began then. In the first file Elena opened, I saw the line item description corresponding to the 11 delivery slips I had photographed the night before. Beach Villa 3 was not listed as a villa. It was listed as a coastal maintenance storage building. The campaign began at 7:10 that morning, before I had even finished my second cup of coffee. The first screenshot came from the Grand Mariner's executive housekeeper, whom I had hired during the project's 2nd year. She wrote only one sentence. Natalie, look at this. It was a screenshot of an article on a regional travel site. In the photograph, Diane stood in the lobby with one hand resting on Evan's arm, and her answer appeared in bold in the middle of the article. Her daughter-in-law had been losing control for months, and the family deeply regretted that she had chosen her husband's important day to act out. The second screenshot arrived 4 minutes later. In a message to the hotel's mid-level management group, Lauren announced that security was conducting a review because internal documents had been removed from the building the night before, and asked everyone not to share files with anyone no longer employed by the company. The third screenshot was the most unsettling because it was clever. A media account managed by Lauren's team posted a frame exported from the loading area security camera, 2 black SUVs in the rain, and me walking toward one of the doors. The caption said people were wondering who had picked up Mrs. Reed at 11 at night and why 2 vehicles had been necessary. Using security footage to shape public opinion was an abuse of access, not ordinary communications work. By noon, the circulating version was complete. I had disrupted the ceremony out of jealousy, stolen documents, and left with a wealthy man. Meanwhile, the official morning photograph posted at 9 showed Evan standing in front of the brass lobby plaque with Sienna half a step beside him. When a reporter asked, he said Miss Blake was a trusted colleague, and that it was sad someone wanted to turn a team accomplishment into a personal matter. I read that sentence 3 times and realized I no longer felt anything. Perhaps after a certain point, repeated lies become nothing more than data. What hurt me came from another direction. At 10:20, Bell Harbor Properties sent notice terminating the remaining work under my consulting contract to restore 2 historic buildings in Beaufort, a contract I had signed 3 months earlier and for which I had completed the survey phase. They invoked the termination for convenience clause and confirmed that completed work would still be paid. The stated reason was budget restructuring. At 11, a hotel investment fund in Savannah sent a similar letter, terminating the unperformed work under its contract. At 11:40, the organizers of the Southeastern Heritage Hotel Conference removed my speaking invitation from the October program. The organizer called, apologized sincerely, then explained that a principal sponsor had expressed concern. I knew who that principal sponsor was. The night before, he had sat at table 2, in the exact seat I had assigned on the event plan. At 12:15, Evan sent me a message. He attached screenshots of all 3 letters. I did not yet know how he had obtained them. Perhaps the 3 organizations had sent them to him, or perhaps he had contacted them first. No hotel on this coast will ever hire you again. I sat at my father's dining table, stared at those words, and began typing. I wrote a long message. It contained the seawall, the $850,000, the 11 nights I had slept at the construction site, and the photograph of the inventory sheet time-stamped 7:40 p.m. I wanted him to know that I knew. I wanted him to lose a night of sleep. Maya placed her hand on the table, not on my phone, only on the tabletop beside it. If you send that, she said, then when we stand before a court, an arbitrator, or a committee reviewing this matter, their attorney will put it on a screen and say, this is marital revenge. And if I stay silent, then all they have is rumor. You have records. I left the message in my drafts. I did not delete it. I needed to remember how badly I had wanted to send it, so I would recognize that feeling the next time. Then I opened a new folder and began doing what I did better, building a record. I preserved the original emails, messages, and screenshots on the device, then created working copies named by date, time, source, and sender. Each contract termination letter was stored with its original email. Maya sent preservation requests for the posts, the camera footage, and the logs identifying who had exported the frame. A digital forensic specialist extracted Evan's message using an authenticated tool, and Maya accepted and preserved the file. At 3 that afternoon, Elena called me into the rear study. She was examining the forensic copy of the project logs I had created. Together with the cost ledger and vendor records Reed Coastal had submitted to the trust in its construction compliance package. She had taped 3 large sheets of paper to the wall, each bearing one name: Blue Heron Design LLC, Tidal Edge Procurement, Palmetto Guest Solutions. These 3 vendors appeared in the renovation cost ledger 14 months ago, Elena said. They did not exist there before that. All 3 stopped invoicing after project turnover. She pointed to the registered business address line for each company. Blue Heron Design was registered to a mailbox at a Cape Haven postal center. Title Edge Procurement was registered to an address on Bay Street, 4th floor, Suite 402, the same mailing address as Collins and Ward, the law firm where Lucas worked. A shared address does not prove Lucas owns the company, Elena said, but it is a connection that requires verification. Palmetto Guest Solutions was registered to an apartment in Harbor Point. Palmetto's vendor onboarding file contained a utility bill used to verify the address. The name on the bill was Sienna Blake, and the account had remained active through April of the previous year. I stared at the 3 sheets on the wall for a long time. Over 6 years, I had approved hundreds of contractors. A legitimate business did not necessarily need a warehouse, a shop, or direct employees, but it had to leave evidence proportionate to the work it billed. Subcontracts, certificates of insurance, delivery receipts, labor records, progress photographs, or completion certificates. I could not remember a single dispute with Blue Heron Design. I think 4 questions have to be answered, I said. The actual owner of each entity, the receiving bank account and the authorized signer, every invoice and its line item description, and evidence of actual work, subcontracts, timesheets, warehouse receipts, site photographs, anything showing real people performed real work. Elena wrote them down. Those are the right questions, she said. I will decide the order of examination and report the results to the special committee. Then she looked up. Do you want me to call Miss Blake first? People usually begin with the weakest link. I had thought about it all morning. Sienna might panic. Sienna might talk. And if she talked, I might get what I most wanted to hear, rather than what I actually needed. I recommend that we call no one yet, I said. No one in the Reed family should know where we are looking until the documents have been preserved and reconciled. Elena considered that, then nodded. I agree at this stage. The interview decision will be reported to the special committee. I turned my back on the screenshots spread across the dining table. In the previous 24 hours, I had lost my husband, my job, 2 contracts, and a place on the stage. But those things were rumor, and rumor did not carry a signature at the bottom of the page. Invoices did. At 6 that evening, Elena knocked and placed a newly printed preliminary summary in front of me. According to the cost ledger and vendor records Reed Coastal had submitted to the trust, the 3 companies had received $3.4 million from the Grand Mariner renovation budget. In the existing records, none of the companies could produce payroll records, subcontracts, delivery receipts, or evidence of completed work proportionate to the amount received. Elena worked through the night, and no one told her she had to. By 10 the next morning, the rear study in my father's house had turned into something I had seen many times in my professional life. 3 walls covered with paper, a line stretched across the room holding printouts in chronological order, and a classification board dividing every Grand Mariner renovation expense into 3 groups. The first group contained legitimate expenditures supported by contracts, acceptance records, and site photographs. They made up most of the project, and I recognized my signature at the bottom of many reports in that group. The second group contained expenditures with missing documentation but no current signs of irregularity. The third was the group Elena had circled in red. The total requiring review, she said, is $7.2 million. She did not emphasize the number. She read it the way someone reads a blood pressure measurement. Of that $7.2 million, $3.4 million flowed through Blue Heron, Title Edge, and Palmetto. The rest was scattered among line items with the correct descriptions but the wrong quantities, wrong prices, or wrong timing. Elena handed me the 3 companies' invoices. I read the line item descriptions and felt a chill run down my spine, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they were familiar. Coastal Collection living room furnishings, premium commercial kitchen equipment, native salt-tolerant landscaping, imported marble, custom cut. I knew every line. I had written nearly identical descriptions in my own bid packages. The problem, Elena said, is that none of these items appears in the guest areas. She placed beside them the fixed asset inventory I had prepared before turnover. The hotel's commercial kitchen had been purchased from an Atlanta supplier, with serial numbers and warranties. The lobby marble came from a Georgia quarry, and I had gone with the team to select each slab. The salt-tolerant landscaping had been performed by a Wilmington company under a 3-phase contract. The descriptions on the 3 companies' invoices copied hotel line items, but the actual goods were not delivered to the hotel. Elena opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. She had reconciled the tracking numbers and delivery records in the project files. 11 deliveries over 7 months had all stopped at the same coordinates, not at the hotel's receiving dock. The coordinates were at the end of the Southern Service Road, inside the dunes. "That's Beach Villa 3, I said. Elena opened a survey photo file that one of her technicians had taken from a public area that morning. A 1.5-story cedar-clad structure with a flat roof, an infinity pool facing the ocean, and sliding glass doors spanning the entire front. No sign, no guest entrance, no parking area. The drawings and procurement schedule show 4 bedrooms, a temperature-controlled wine room, and furnishings matching Blue Heron's invoices," Elena said. She turned to the final page. "As of today, the total cost traceable to this structure is $1.6 million. I studied the photograph for a long time. 6 years earlier, when I presented the preservation plan to the board, I had been forced to eliminate an outdoor spa planned for that exact stretch of dunes because the ground lease restricted new construction and obtaining approval would take 9 months. I had sat with the design team and said a sentence I still remembered: 'If we cannot obtain approval, we do not build.' Someone in the company had heard that sentence and reached the exact opposite conclusion. In the internal records, the structure carried the cost code for a coastal maintenance storage building. That label concealed the private residential use, but it did not eliminate the obligation to obtain the landlord's approval." Elena slid another sheet toward me, and this time she spoke more quietly. "This came from the project mailbox preserved with the audit records, not from personal correspondence. It was an email from Sienna to Evan with a photograph of a fabric sample attached. One sentence in the body read, 'I want the primary bedroom in our home to face directly east.' I held the page for about 5 seconds. Then I placed it face down on the table. I recommend leaving it out of the presentation." Maya, standing in the doorway, turned around. "Are you sure? It is evidence of intent. It is evidence of an affair," I said. "If I put it on the conference table, everything else will be read as jealousy. I am not walking into that room as a betrayed wife." Elena looked at Maya, then nodded. "Then we keep 3 tracks. The money flow, the land use, and the signatures." The signatures were the part that kept me seated the longest. Evan had signed the budget approval in every payment package for the 3 companies, each time beside a statement confirming that the line item had been inspected and accepted. Charles had signed the capital use progress report sent to Atlantic National Bank, listing the entire $7.2 million as hotel property renovation costs. And Lucas had drafted the land lease status certification, the same blue-covered document he had placed before me in the bedroom, stating that no defaults existed and every structure had been properly approved. According to the transaction schedule Maya obtained, that document was to be included in the closing package sent to Meridian Lux. 3 people. 3 different types of documents. The same structure in the dunes. "How much time do we have?" I asked. Maya opened her notebook. "The $38 million loan matures in 5 days. Meridian has proposed a final signing schedule, and its condition precedent is the trust's extension document. The reads are pressing by the hour." Thomas rose from his chair. "Then answer them today. Deny it. End this." I understood why he wanted that. A denial letter was the fastest and cleanest route, and he had waited 9 years for the chance to stand beside me. "If we deny it today," I said, "what happens?" Thomas stopped. "Lucas has time to revise or replace the records. Sienna can move out of the villa. Evan can repay part of the money and call it an accounting adjustment. Then they find another buyer. And the only story left in the press is that a bitter wife blocked her husband's deal." I looked at the map of the 18 acres spread across the table. "I want them to walk into the room themselves carrying the exact documents they signed." Maya drafted the letter in 40 minutes, and I revised it twice. The special committee approved the final version. The final version contained 3 important sentences. The trust had completed a preliminary review of the tenant's submission, and the results allowed the file to proceed to final consideration. The trust invited authorized representatives of the tenant to attend a working session to complete the file. The session would take place at Grant Shore Trust headquarters at 9 the following morning. Nowhere did the letter say the trust would extend the lease. Nowhere did it promise anything. But a person who needed one signature to save $38 million would see only one thing. Elena completed the working file at 2 that afternoon and built the presentation in the agreed order. Land first, money second, signatures last. After the invitation was sent, Maya issued standard document preservation notices to Reed Coastal Hospitality, Collins and Ward, and Atlantic National Bank. The notices did not state allegations or define the scope of the audit. Maya's system recorded that the invitation was opened at 4:02 p.m. from the Collins and Ward office network. The first line of the letter appeared on the screen. The file may proceed to final consideration. Most of what happened in Evan's office that afternoon, I learned only later, through testimony and through their own invoices. Lucas carried a printed copy of the letter to the fourth-floor executive suite at 4:20. Charles read it twice, then handed it back to Evan, and according to the executive assistant's later testimony, said he had known all along that the trust was merely an old family organization that did not want trouble. The hotel's sales system recorded that at 4:42 p.m., a bottle of Krug was released from the basement wine cellar to the executive suite under the cost code for partner entertainment. For the next 2 hours, 3 men sat in a room overlooking the beach and mentally sold a hotel they did not yet have the authority to transfer. Evan told Charles the $185 million transaction was essentially complete and only paperwork remained. Charles talked about a new chain of Reed resorts running along the coast from Georgia to North Carolina. The executive assistant testified that he used the exact phrase I had heard hundreds of times in 9 years, the Reed legacy. Lucas, meanwhile, recounted what had happened the night before. He said I would sign within 48 hours because people like me always signed when they ran out of money. Those 3 men believed I had no money, no profession, and no authority. On the first 2 points, they had done their work very well. At 6 that evening, Evan texted Sienna. The message later appeared in the production she made through her attorney, and it was very short. After this week, that house will belong to us. Immediately afterward, Sienna began ordering items for the villa. Over the next 4 hours, she placed 4 orders: a teak outdoor furniture set, 2 metal sculptures from a Charleston gallery, 36 bottles of wine, a set of gym equipment, including mirrors and rubber flooring. The total deposits were $180,000, paid with a corporate card linked to the renovation project account. We learned almost immediately because transaction alerts for the project account went to a finance mailbox within the scope of the audit. At 9 that night, Elena received a copy of the new debit notice. Elena printed the transaction and pinned it to the third wall beneath the 3 sheets bearing the company's names. "They're still spending," she said, "from the project account itself." I stared at the page longer than necessary. There was one thing I told no one. All afternoon, part of me had still been waiting for a different message, not an apology, just one sentence showing that Evan had stopped for even a moment to think about 9 years. What I received was a deposit receipt for gym mirrors. At 10:15 that night, my phone vibrated. Lucas Collins. I let it ring out. He left a voicemail 2 minutes and 18 seconds long, and I played it on speaker in the small conference room behind my father's house, with Maya seated across from me and a recording device between us. He said Evan would issue a separation notice the next morning, and Reed Coastal would file a civil action accusing me of sabotaging property and damaging the company's reputation. He said every remaining consulting contract I had would disappear within a month. He said the $30,000 was my final opportunity and would expire at midnight the next day. Then he said the sentence Maya replayed 3 times. "And one piece of professional advice, Natalie. Do not contact the landlord. If you try to drag that trust into a family matter, I will sue you for interference with contractual relations, and you will lose more than the money you have now." Maya pressed stop. She did not smile. She wrote only this in her notebook: "Threat of litigation intended to prevent contact with landlord. Recorded, time-stamped." I sat silently for a while. I had always thought Lucas was the most careful person in that family. He was careful with contracts, not with people. He had just left a recording ordering me not to contact the landlord. He did not know he was calling the landlord's phone. The recording did not bring me relief. It merely confirmed that Lucas still viewed this as a marital dispute he could threaten into silence. The man who had just threatened to ruin me was someone I had eaten Thanksgiving dinner with every year for 9 years, and he still did not know where he stood on the map. At 11 that night, Elena closed the presentation. 3 tracks: land, money, signatures. Every assertion tied to a coded source document. After the special committee approved it, I stood and read the instructions for the following day line by line, so Maya could reduce them to a written directive signed by the managing trustee. At exactly 9 the next morning, the trust would send Reed Coastal Hospitality a notice of default under the ground lease. At exactly 9, the trust would send Atlantic National Bank and Meridian Lux notice that the lease was in default and the transaction was not eligible to close. At exactly 9, the trust would suspend all consideration of approval for the change of control. And 3 things were not permitted to happen. No guest was to be asked to leave a room, no reservation was to be canceled, and no employee paycheck was to be delayed. Elena had to identify the operating accounts clearly so none of the documents touched room revenue, guest service expenses, or payroll. 9 o'clock was not an aesthetic number. It was when the parties began processing files for the day, the morning shift had completed turnover, and the working session I had convened would begin. Maya finished writing, read the directive back once, then looked up. After 9 tomorrow morning there will be no going back. They will know exactly who is standing on the other side. Thomas stood in the conference room doorway holding a cup of cold coffee. He had been there for nearly an hour without saying a word. "Are you sure?" he asked. I thought of the 318 people who would report to work the next morning knowing nothing. I thought of the executive housekeeper, the maintenance team, and the electrician who had crawled through the ballroom ceiling with me for an entire summer. "I'm not shutting down the hotel," I said. "I'm only preventing them from completing a transaction they do not have the authority to complete." I signed the directive at 11:42 p.m. What I did not know then was that a few minutes after 9 the next morning, Atlantic National Bank would independently pause transactions on the project account for review. In the Grand Mariner lobby boutique, Diane's metal corporate card would touch the payment terminal, and the screen would turn red. I was not at the Grand Mariner that morning. I reconstructed the scene in the boutique from 4 sources: camera footage, the boutique manager's testimony, Atlantic National's transaction log, and an article posted that afternoon on the travel site Lauren had cultivated for 3 years with complimentary tickets and rooms. At 8:45, Diane and Lauren walked into Marchetti, the fashion boutique in the east wing of the main lobby. The space had originally been the hotel's mailroom in 1927. I had preserved the vaulted ceiling, restored 4 stained glass panels, and persuaded Charles to lease it to an independent label rather than a luxury chain because I wanted guests to see a wooden storefront instead of an illuminated sign. Diane had entered that boutique at least once a week for 6 years. According to the manager's testimony, she announced from the doorway that the family needed clothes for a celebratory weekend trip. She said it loudly enough for 2 customers looking at shoes to hear. Then she added that after that week, the hotel would change hands for $185 million. The manager documented that detail because it struck her as unusual. Hotel employees were not permitted to discuss transactions with guests. Lauren selected her items faster than her mother. A crocodile handbag, 3 dresses, a pair of emerald earrings. Diane chose 2 outfits and a silk scarf. The total came to $96,200. The camera showed that the wall clock read 8:59. At exactly 9, 3 documents left Maya's Grant Shore Trust mailbox. A ground lease default notice went to Reed Coastal Hospitality. Notice that the transaction was not eligible to close went to Atlantic National Bank and Meridian Lux. A suspension of review for the change of control approval went to all 3 parties. Atlantic National, which had already been reviewing the account since the previous evening, acted within minutes. It did not close the operating account. Payroll, food supplier payments, and service contracts continued to run, exactly as Elena had identified the night before. What was restricted was the spending facility connected to the renovation project account, the same account from which Sienna had made $180,000 in deposits the night before. The same account to which 4 Reed family corporate cards had been linked since the project's first year because, during construction, every expense had been placed in one account for convenience. I knew that detail. Twice I had recommended separating the family's corporate cards from the project account, and both times Charles had said accounting would sort it out. At 9:07, Lauren handed the cashier the corporate platinum card. The terminal returned a decline code. The manager apologized, said the connection was occasionally unreliable, and ran it again. The second time, the terminal printed a line directing the cardholder to contact the issuing bank. Lauren laughed and said it was a system error. The camera showed her maintaining the same posture, one hand resting on the counter. But the camera showed something else. Immediately after the second attempt, she turned quickly toward the door and then back. It looked as though she were checking to see whether anyone was watching. Diane opened her wallet and took out the metal corporate card bearing her name. That was the detail I thought about most afterward. She did not ask Lauren what had happened. She did not call anyone first. She drew the second card the way someone draws a stronger card from a hand, because for 30 years there had always been a stronger card. The terminal declined the transaction a third time. The manager asked whether she would like to use another form of payment. According to the testimony, the question was asked very quietly. But the boutique was small, with a vaulted ceiling and stone floors, and I knew its acoustics well because I had overseen the sound treatment and failed. There were 4 other people in the store. One of them was Corinne Adler, a travel writer for a regional magazine who had written 2 articles about the grand reopening and had once been invited by Lauren to a family dinner. She recognized Diane immediately. She did not take a photograph. She simply stood by the scarf display and listened. Diane called Charles. The call went to voicemail. According to the driver's later testimony, Charles was on his way to Grant Shore Trust headquarters and was not looking at his phone. She called a second time. The same thing happened. Lauren called Lucas. Lucas answered immediately because Lucas always answered. I learned what happened next from the investigative record. At 9:14, he opened his work inbox on his phone. 3 notices were waiting. The transaction deposit would not be released because a condition precedent had not been satisfied. The renovation project account had been flagged for transaction restrictions. And a document preservation request had been sent to 3 entities, including Collins and Ward. Lucas had practiced corporate law for 16 years. He did not need to read them twice. A frozen card facility could be a technical problem. Transaction funds not being released at the same time, a preservation request specifically named his law firm was not a technical problem. According to Lauren's testimony, he ended the call while she was still speaking, left his meeting, and turned his car around toward Collins and Ward. Back in the boutique, Diane told the manager to hold all the merchandise and charge it to the family's house account. The manager replied that she was very sorry, but finance had temporarily suspended non-operating charges. Diane left the merchandise on the counter and walked out. She did not pay with a personal card. In 6 years of sitting at the same table with her, I had never seen her spend her own money. The camera showed her stop at the door, adjust her collar, then walk across the lobby with a perfectly normal stride, past the brass plaque bearing her family's name and the 4 stained glass panels I had spent 7 months obtaining approval to restore. Corinne Adler's article went online at 12:20 that afternoon. Its title was 4 words long, and that day it was shared more often than every article about the grand reopening combined. I did not design that scene. I did not know Diane would go shopping that morning. I did not know Lauren would choose exactly 9 o'clock to pay. I chose only the time the 3 documents would be sent. The rest was entirely theirs. For 6 years, I had watched those 2 women spend project money as if it were pocket money, in the exact places where everyone could see, because for them being seen was the point. That morning they were standing in the same place. Only the payment terminal had changed its mind. Lucas reached Collins and Ward headquarters at 9:31. According to the receptionist's testimony, the lobby was unusually quiet that morning. No one was making calls, no one was standing at the coffee machine. 3 digital forensic specialists and 2 compliance attorneys, summoned by the managing partner, were waiting on the row of chairs beside the glass doors. One of the attorneys stood, handed Lucas a packet, and said, By direction of the managing partner, you are not to touch your computer. While Lucas stood in the middle of his law firm's lobby, I was on the 9th floor of a building a few blocks away, rereading the last page of the presentation. What happened at Collins and Ward that morning, I learned from the firm's internal minutes, the inventory of preserved materials, and Lucas's own testimony in 2 later proceedings. A compliance attorney took Lucas into a private conference room and read the scope of the data preservation. The server containing Reed Coastal Hospitality's transaction files. All email relating to Blue Heron Design, Title Edge Procurement, and Palmetto Guest Solutions. The formation files and banking records for those 3 entities. And every draft of the land-lease status certification, including its revision history. Lucas did what any attorney would do. He said most of those materials were protected by attorney-client privilege and objected to any production before they were reviewed. The managing partner's internal directive had anticipated that response. The trust's notice required only preservation. It did not authorize anyone to inspect or seize documents. The forensic team would create backups, and the 2 compliance attorneys would review privilege before anything was produced. Privilege could protect legal advice, but it did not automatically cover company formation records, banking documents, or version history. The lead attorney handed Lucas the inventory and instructed him not to log into any system until the backups were complete. According to Lucas's own testimony, that was when he understood the real problem. It was not privilege, it was the code. In the firm's system, every issued document carried a matter code tied to the responsible attorney. Every corporate banking package prepared by the firm carried that code. Every draft revised in the document system preserved the editor's name, the time of the revision, and the content of the change. 3 entities under review, the payment packages, a certification stating that no defaults existed. Everything led to the same code, and that code was his. He could not delete anything because his access had been locked and forensic copies were being created. He could not alter anything because the version history had been preserved. And he could not call it an administrative error because an administrative error does not repeat across multiple files over many months. Grant Shore Trust headquarters stood on Custom Street in the old granite customs house, with arched doors and 2 pairs of columns at the front. My grandmother had bought it while it was awaiting demolition. I had been there exactly twice in my life, both times as a child. That morning was the 3rd. The lobby camera recorded Evan and Charles entering just before 9. Evan carried a leather-bound document packet. Charles carried nothing. He walked half a step ahead, the way he had entered every building for 30 years. The receptionist invited them into the east elevator. A trust assistant led them down the corridor, past 4 windows overlooking the harbor, and into the large conference room in the southeast corner. The room contained a solid walnut conference table and 2 rows of chairs. On the right side of the table, where the 2 men were invited to sit, there were only 2 chairs, both lower than the others. I had not invented that detail. Maya told me the lower chairs were original to the customs house era and had been used for people declaring cargo. I had asked only that the existing arrangement remain unchanged and that nothing be added. At the north end of the table stood the chairperson's seat, high-backed, with darkened leather arms. It was empty. On the table before the 2 lower chairs were 2 bottles of water, 2 blank pads, and 2 pens. No files had been prepared for them. Evan set down his leather-bound packet and sat. Charles walked to the window, looked out at the harbor, then turned and asked the assistant when the trust's representative would arrive. I had given her 1 sentence in advance, and she repeated it word for word. "The managing trustee will meet with you in 45 minutes. Then she left and closed the door. 45 minutes was how long Elena needed to complete the final reconciliation between the bank notices sent to the transaction parties at 9 and the invoice schedule locked the night before. Maya and the special committee had approved that timing. If I entered earlier, I would have to state something not yet proven, and Lucas needed only 1 such sentence. While Evan and Charles waited, Lucas called Evan at 9:39. That was the call that, if answered, might have changed the course of the entire morning. Evan's phone lit up on the table. He looked at the screen, saw Lucas's name, and declined the call. Later, when asked why he had not answered, he said Lucas always called repeatedly before major meetings to remind him of things he already knew, and that morning he did not want his mind cluttered. The second call went to voicemail. So did the third, because Evan had switched his phone to silent. According to Evan's later testimony, before the phone vibrated, Charles had told him not to be nervous. He said the trust was an old family arrangement created by an elderly woman in the 90s, that organizations like that were run by salaried attorneys, and that they always signed when the number was large enough. He added that, if necessary, he would increase the ground rent by 15%, and the matter would be finished in 20 minutes. That was the last sentence Charles Reed spoke as a man who believed he was going into a negotiation. The trust's large conference room had an audio and video recording system for formal proceedings, and before the meeting began, Maya had sent notice that the entire time the room was in use would be recorded. So I had those 45 minutes in full, from 2 camera angles. For the first 10 minutes, Charles stood at the window. He looked down at the harbor, then along the southern coastline, and told his son the value of those 18 acres would increase by at least 40% once Meridian put its brand on the property. He said it in the voice of a man calculating the value of his own asset. Evan was not listening. He was rehearsing his opening. I knew that speech. In 6 years, I had heard him construct about 30 like it, and I had written 11 of them. The structure was always the same, a story about the building's history, an impressive number, a word of thanks to the person sitting across from him, and only then the proposal. At the 19-minute mark, Charles's phone vibrated. Diane called twice in a row. He did not answer, and she finally texted. The camera could not read the content, but a later device extraction showed 3 messages sent within 90 seconds. Lauren's corporate platinum card had been declined. Diane's metal corporate card had also been declined. She had been forced to leave all the merchandise on the counter in front of a reporter and 3 guests. Charles read the messages, then placed his phone face down on the table. "The bank is having another system problem," he said. At the 24-minute mark, Lauren called Evan. He listened for about 40 seconds. During those 40 seconds, his expression changed twice, and when he ended the call, he told his father the transaction funds had not been released. "A procedural hold," Charles said. "Every buyer does that before signing day. Lauren says the escrow agent hasn't released the funds because the trust suspended review of the change of control approval." Charles was silent for about 5 seconds. Then he said that if the trust wanted to squeeze them for more money at the last minute, that was normal, and they would pay more if necessary. At the 32-minute mark, Evan pressed the call button for the assistant. He asked whether he could use a private room to make a short phone call. She said no private room was currently available and invited him to continue waiting for the managing trustee. He said no, thank you. The camera showed him sit down, open his lock screen one more time, then place the phone face down exactly as his father had done. At the 38-minute mark, neither man was speaking anymore. The camera showed Evan finish his bottle of water. Charles sat in the lower chair for the first time that morning and held himself straight, both hands on the table, the way a person sits when he begins to understand that he is waiting. At the 39-minute mark, Evan's phone lit up for the final time. He looked at Lucas's name, kept the phone on silent, and placed it face down. I was standing in a nearby preparation room. There was no sense of victory. I had expected one. What I felt was a cold concentration, exactly like the feeling before a structural inspection I had spent 6 months preparing for. Everything was already in the file, and the only task left was not to damage it with one unnecessary sentence. Elena handed me the final reconciliation at 9:44. "It matches," she said. "All 3 tracks." Maya opened the conference room door at 9:45. She entered first, carrying 2 files. Elena followed with a document cart. Then came the 3 subject matter members of the special committee: a coastal real estate valuation expert, a bank auditor, and an attorney specializing in long-term ground leases. Maya gave a brief greeting. The 5 of them sat along the north side of the table. I entered last. I wore a charcoal suit, no jewelry, and my hair tied back. I carried exactly one thing, the original 1,987 ground lease, bound in cloth with a worn spine. On the night of the grand reopening, a steel door had closed behind me in the loading area of a building I had spent 6 years rebuilding. I paused in the conference room doorway with my hand on the brass handle and realized I did not need to feel anything. I only needed to walk in and sit in the correct place. I pushed the door open. Evan shot to his feet. He said my name not as a question, but as a reflex. Charles laughed. It was the same laugh I had heard in the ballroom on the night of the grand reopening, and it left his mouth for exactly the same length of time. "What is she doing here?" he asked Maya. "Looking for a job or begging to get back into the marriage?" Maya did not answer. Charles turned to me, and he had about 4 seconds to choose a different direction. I gave him those 4 seconds, and I knew I was giving them. In 4 seconds, a man could ask, "What is happening with our accounts?" Or, "Why is my daughter-in-law here with the landlord's attorney?" Or he could simply remain silent and look around the room. Charles chose the direction he had followed for 30 years. "This meeting is for the landowner and the buyer," he said, "not for the person who picks the curtains. Someone remove her." I walked along the side of the table. Not quickly, not slowly, across the terrazzo floor, inside a room quiet enough to hear the building's air conditioning system. Evan understood before his father did. I saw his head turn as I moved, and I saw the moment he realized I was not stopping at the middle of the table. I walked to the north end. Maya stood and pulled out the high-backed chair. I sat down, placed the cloth-bound lease before me, and aligned it with the edge of the table. "What are you doing there?" Evan asked. I opened the lease to its first page. If I began with identity, the meeting would become a family matter. And in a family matter, anyone could say anything. If I began with documents, then by the time I told them who I was, they would have nowhere left to stand and argue.